I direct the CTSI Biostatistics Epidemiology Research Design, fondly called BIRD unit at the CTSI. And this is a workshop we do 2 to 3 times a year. We did it rather selfishly because not only did we want people to start using REDCap and encourage them to do so rather than getting Excel files from people, but we also want people to think about how they're structuring their data before they come and send us our data that can be in pretty terrible formats. So this is going to be about REDCap, but also some hints here and there about organizing your data and how you organize your study design itself within the structure of REDCap. So the format is going to be, you all have the slides, is that we intend this to be a very hands-on type of workshop. When we do this on ground, we actually have everybody bring their own study form so they can actually walk out the door with at least the start of their own database set up. But given the constraints of this virtual world, that really won't work out. So we have you all just doing the same little database that we'll be developing, that you'll have to apply what you learn to your own database. So we'll be lecturing a little bit through the workshops, through the slides, and then breaking out to do activities that cover the topics that we were just spoke about, back and forth. And at the end, I just want to let you know, I'm going to do a little more expansive just demonstration of surveys. It's not part of the workshop if you want to, of the structured part of the workshop. So if you want to hang on and listen to that, you're welcome to, but it's not part of the structured part of the workshop. But I know a lot more people are using surveys now because of the way our research has had to change because of the pandemic. So I will be demonstrating that, and it will take about 30 minutes to do. So other than that, let's take off with Melissa.
Hi, welcome to the REDCap workshop. I'm just going to give a brief introduction to what the workshop is going to be like. Okay, there we go. So initially, we'll start with kind of an introduction, like I'm doing right now, about databases in general and REDCap more specifically. Then we'll start working on actually creating a database, and that will constitute creating forms, which basically are individual parts of the database, you know, a form for demographics, a form for clinical data, that kind of structure. And then we can learn about defining events and as well as study arms. So the events are going to be, you know, sometimes you'll have, well, let's just kind of work through it. And then the last part is the users, and that's where you can go to add or get rid of people who are no longer working on your study. You can also conveniently set expiration dates for the users. So you can add somebody who's maybe working with you for 6 months and allow that to expire after that time point. Then we'll work on actually using the database. So we'll talk again about, well, I guess users is in both places, but we'll be entering some data using the little form that we're all kind of working from, some activities. We will also be retrieving our data, and we'll talk a lot about, not a lot, we'll talk a little about calendars and scheduling and how you can use that feature in REDCap as well. So the interface, when you go to REDCap, has this at the top of it. So you can see there's a home button, which is just the REDCap home. Then there is projects. That's where you're going to have all the list of all your projects that you're working on. This is to create a new project. The help and facts button will give you frequently asked questions and other resources that you can use. The training videos I want to point out because it's very useful. This is where, you know, we're going to teach you some of the basics today, but there may be advanced features that you want to use, and that's where the training videos really come in handy. And then sending it will be the last thing that you do with your database. This is a secure way to transfer your data to somebody else. And then of course you can also message people through REDCap. Why am I not advancing it? Okay. Did I skip one? No, here we go. Okay, so on the left-hand side of your REDCap screen, when you log in, you'll see up here some other information. Again, you can click on your projects. Project setup is where you go to set up your project. This is kind of, and then you have a record status dashboard, which is very useful. It shows you everybody that's been, every ID that's been entered into the data and what forms they have completed. This is where you would add or edit records that are existing in the database. And then we have some applications in this region here. So you can see the calendar, exporting data, creating reports, looking at some general basic statistics can be done through REDCap as well. This is a data import tool. So if you're using, if you need to import data into REDCap, this will help you there. Data comparison tool comes in handy mostly when you're doing double data entry, which may be an advanced feature you might want to use if you're doing, for example, a meta-analysis and you have 2 or 3 screeners. Let's see, some of the other really useful ones, the user rights, this is where you go to add and change user rights. And then probably some of these other ones were not as commonly used. You can create reports and then view them later. MyCap is an external module that is an application that you might want to use. Again, we're not going to cover MyCap, but it is something that you may want to use. And again, just to help the tutorials. And then here's a nice thing, you can suggest a new feature. So, and of course, contacting the REDCap administrator does happen if you want to apply certain modules. You actually need to ask them to activate it. Okay, so this is just on the slides to show you what all this does. Okay. So when you create a new database, you go to click on New Project, and this window will appear. And this is where you can give your project a title. You can also select what type of project this is. So generally it's a research project, but it could be, you know, a quality assurance project or some other type. You can enter some notes in here, and then you have an option here to create an empty project, which is just completely blank, or there are templates that you can use as well that are common surveys and forms maybe in there. So for example, down here, you can kind of see grayed out. There is a basic demography form, which I often use and just modify to meet the requirements of the study, the particular study. So here's just a larger view of that. We've named our database Best Database Ever, and we've selected research as the purpose of the project. You can also add information here, which is really nice. If you have multiple projects, you can put the PI's name, their email, the IRB number. It's kind of a nice place to store all this information. And then you specify what type of research here. So if it's basic or bench research, whether it's, you know, maybe a clinical trial, and then down here again, we get to the create an empty project or templates. Okay, so we're going to, in this example, we're creating an empty project, and then we would just click the Create Project button, and we would get a brand new empty database. When you, once you have your project, you can go to the tab up top that says Project Setup, and there are some different options here. This is the one where you just entered, basically right here, where you can modify the title if you change it, modify the PI. That will allow you to do that. This is where Wendy's going to talk about later, enabling surveys. And this is one you would use if you're going to be collecting data repeatedly on the same people. So I think I have, oops, sorry. Sorry, a little bit slippery fingers there. This is also a very important one, the online designer. That's where you're going to go to create your variables and make your forms. And then there are some additional customizations, which we will talk about some of these. Okay, so going here, again, if you want to use surveys, you would want to enable that one. If you want to, let me go back. If you want to have longitudinal data collection, you would want to enable this. Surveys, this one. And then again, if you want to change something. Note that the project status is development. There are two stages of project development. The first one is called development, and that's when you're building your database. Once you've developed your database and you have tested it thoroughly by entering a lot of fake data, then you can move it into what's called production mode, after which time it becomes much more difficult to change anything. It's not as difficult to add a new variable, but you really can't change existing variables once you're in production. Okay, we're going to move on to create the database. And I think that's going to be, somebody else is going to be speaking to you. I forget who's going to do forms, but.
It's me.
Okay, thanks, Trevor.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so my dog Leon wanted to be here for this as well, so he's going to learn something about REDCap. So now that you've created your database, really, you have the shell of your project that you're going to be working with. What's the next thing that you need to do? Really, you want to be focusing on forms next, because the forms are like the interface between whoever is inputting data and the actual data that's recorded. So we'll start to create a form. Designing your data collection instruments is the section that you want to go to. And what you're going to click on is the online designer. And this is going to let you create a form to be a part of your REDCap project. There are a couple different ways that you can import forms. You can manually create these forms via the online designer here. That's going to be creating a new project. And there are different aspects to creating these forms. You have your forms, you have your variables, which are all the fields in the forms. You have calculated fields that you can have. So for example, if you ask for somebody's height and weight, you can calculate a field based on their height and weight called BMI or something like that. You can calculate maybe like a risk score based on somebody's collected variables. You can designate which of your variables are personal identifiers. So if you have variables like address that could identify a subject or a birth date, you can designate which of your variables are those identifiers. And that's important because sometimes you want to share your data, but you don't want to share personal identifiers in the data. So you can create your own form, or why reinvent the wheel? Sometimes you can upload a form from another source. It could be a common form like demographics, or it could be a survey about depression or something like that. And if you're going to be doing that, you can import from a library. REDCap keeps a library of common forms, but make sure that you follow the copyright laws when you use those materials. Another nice thing about REDCap is that if you don't want to do everything online, you can have your form printed out with a PDF and then use that for paper data collection if you're going out in the field. So once you click this online designer button, it's going to take you to the online designer, which will let you start to create these data collection instruments. This is where you select either create a new instrument from scratch, import a new instrument from the REDCap library, Or you can upload a zip file from another project, say that you have multiple projects and you want to use the same form that you created among those projects. This is something that you can do by importing a survey form from another project. Your forms are going to be displayed down here, the instrument name. So if we're creating a form, we could say that our form is my first instrument. You can click to modify the name later if you wanted to, but your instrument's displayed here. To add a form, you click on the Create button that starts a new instrument from scratch. The fields here is how many fields are in the form, and each field will translate to a particular variable. So if you ask somebody what their name is, you might have two fields. You could have first name and last name, and then let's say their address would be a third field, or if you want to separate that into street address, city, that would be a field for each of those. So this is how many variables you're going to have in your database. And then certain actions, miscellaneous actions like renaming the form, copying the form, or deleting a whole form will be in this Choose Action button on the right. Now let's talk about importing forms from other REDCap libraries. If we wanted to import a form, we can click on this Import button here, and that will take us to a page that gives us information on the REDCap shared library, which is a repository of data collection instruments that REDCap stores. There are potentially a lot of these instruments in the REDCap shared library, so sometimes you might want to do a keyword search for the type of form that you're looking for. In this case, we did a keyword search for demographic, and that's going to show us some already created forms that have demographics in them. And so, for example, right here, by doing a search, we see that there are already some forms, common identifiers, demographics right here that we could use if we didn't want to start from scratch by creating a demographics form. So this demographics form, once we click on it, we see who it was created by, a description of it. So this demographics form contains basic recommended minimal data collection for 18 domains. And we can view this form as a web page or view it as a PDF. And if we wanted to import it into our REDCap project, we would have to click this import button right here. Then it would be imported as a form that we could use in our REDCap project. So as you can see, we had our first form. It looks like whoever was doing this created a couple more forms. And so this would be a list of all of the forms in this particular REDCap project. And you can see that forms not only represent different aspects of data to be collected, but also potentially different time points that we want to collect data, or different frequencies at which we want to collect data. So if we have an intake evaluation, maybe that is 5 variables that we would collect when a person signs up or when they have their first visit. Then we have a different form called weekly check-in with 17 fields, 17 variables that, based on the name, we would assume are collected on a weekly basis. So we can see that this first form was used for the initial intake, and then this weekly check-in is going to be used repeatedly week after week. Then when the participant needs fitness testing, they would be given this fitness testing form, where we would fill that out for them. And then we have an additional form down here called volunteer tracking. What is in a form though? So we saw that we wanted previously a demographics form. So we have right here, if this was in our instrument name, we could click on it and we would see that this instrument is basic demographics, and these are the fields or variables that we collect as part of basic demographics. The first variable, your first form, is always going to be a record ID. It's really important that each person or each observation in your data set have a unique identifier. So that's why it puts record ID right here. If you don't want it called record_ID, that would be the variable name, then you can rename it, but just make sure that you have a record ID for each record. So record ID is the first variable here. Then we have, a section header called contact information, and then 4 additional variables down here. First name, last name, their address, and their phone number. If you want to add variables to your form at any time, you can click Add Field, and that will add, where you click the Add Field button, that will add a new variable. You can also, if you wanted to, drag fields manually to rearrange them. If you wanted to add a new field, there are 4 easy steps to follow to do this. By clicking Add Field, like we did here, clicking that button, we would be taken to this Add New Field section. The first question is, what type of field is it? Is it going to be a text field? Is it going to be a numeric? True or false? So this drag down box is going to give us these options right here. There are lots of different options. We can do checkboxes with multiple possible answers. We can do a calculated field, like I said before, where we calculate a variable based on other variables that have already been entered, signature variables, so lots of options there. The most commonly used types of data would be probably a new text box, or just a regular numeric. Also right here, you can see that there's this begin new section field, which actually doesn't translate to a variable. It just gives you a new section in your form to kind of make organization a little bit easier. Once we've added a new field, we can see the type right here that we just selected in the last page, a text box. So that's going to be short text or number or date time. And then we have a bunch of other stuff here. And really the basics are, what is the variable going to be named in your database? We have a label for the variable right here. That could be, what is your address? But then once we have that, we need to figure out what is that variable going to be called in our database. And it has to be, it's probably going to be a shortened version of the field label. So if the field label is what is your address, or what is the participant's address or something like that, the variable name would be a short version of that, maybe just called address. So we want to label the variable, give it a descriptive label. Then we name our variable. Another thing that you can do here, if you don't want to have to think too much about your variable names, is you can have REDCap do it, and it will automatically generate a variable name based on, I think, your label and what it thinks it should be. Then we have a section down here called validation, and validation is going to be important down the road when you actually process your data, to make sure that the right type of data has been entered into the variable. So we specify variable characteristics like validation, which will check, if you're expecting a number, did the person entering the data actually put in a number? Or if you're expecting a height, that ranges between, like, let's say 40 inches and whatever, 120 inches, did somebody put 1,000 inches tall? That would be something that we would not want to see in our variable. And we can have REDCap automatically check to make sure that nothing funky is going on with the data entry. Then we were asking before about different types of identifiers in the data set. This identifier button here tells us if the field contains any identifying information. And so those variables are treated extra sensitively. Variables such as name or social security number or address are potential participant identifiers, and you'd want to click yes for any of those. Another field right here that relates to validation is this variable required? And if it's not, then REDCap will let there be empty values of that variable, but if it's required, it'll make sure that that variable is filled in. And then we have field note down here. This is just a little note that's displayed below where the variable is filled in on the form. So if you say height as your variable, maybe you'd want a field note that says enter height in inches. So validation, really important, especially for biostatisticians. Just as a little anecdote, I was working on a project recently where the clinician was entering the site of melanoma, and there are so many different ways to enter in. Like it's on the participant's arm. Is it on the participant's left arm, right arm, upper arm, back of arm? And since this was a text field that wasn't really validated, we got tons of different responses, and it took so long to go through and clean up that data. So validation can make that easy for us. Where possible, yes, try to minimize the use of free text fields. Don't just let the participant or whoever's entering the data fill in whatever they want. Try to guide them to the type of response that you would want to see in your database. And the way that you can do this is by using categorical field types like multiple choice, true or false, yes or no. And that minimizes the amount of time that you spend on data cleaning later. So for example, if the participant's race is going to be recorded, let's say that they're African American, whoever's inputting the data could input this particular text for African American. The problem with having free text is, what if they put that in? It's the same letters, except now it's capitalized, and during data processing later, these appear as two different categories for us when we're analyzing data. Or AA might be entered, or Black might be entered. And even though as humans, we can understand that these are all similar, software, statistical software treats them all as different. So how can we make all of these different responses, kind of unified into one? A great alternative to that would be to use a radio box right here, where you're forcing whoever is putting the data in to select one of these. And that's going to minimize the amount of errors that you get later on if you had given them a text box. So use these multiple choice boxes when possible. Another way to validate your data when you have to use a free text field is to use REDCap's built-in validation. For example, if we ask somebody's weight, we could have an entry of 185 lbs, or we could have 185 pounds, or we could have 185, and then the person had a heavy finger and entered in 2 additional 5s. And so a way to validate this is to make sure, 1, that it's expecting a number, 2, that the number is within a certain range of possible numbers, and 3, to add this additional information at the bottom right here, enter in pounds. So how did we do that with the weight variable? We have the field label right here, weight, the variable name, weight, and then the validation here, we're going to select that we want to see a number for weight. That'll make sure that there are no letters that are entered into that. And then as far as weight goes, we're going to have a minimum value of 70 and a maximum of 400. And that's going to ensure that whoever enters in the data is going to enter a number between 70 and 400. So we don't get these really large values that are mistakes. The field note that will be displayed at the bottom that we saw right here, enter in pounds, we're going to enter as part of the field note, enter in pounds. And then we want to make sure if a variable is required that we click this yes button for required. Weight was a number variable. We also have different types of variables that we can include for validation. We could have zip codes, we could have times, we could have different ways of entering the dates. And that's going to ensure that, let's say that you have a date, people that use the month, day, year format or the day, month, year format are all going to be on the same page because it's going to validate that the variable is entered in that correct format. There's a subtle difference between an integer and a number. Both of them are numeric. Just an integer is a whole number without decimals, whereas a number can include decimals, like 1.2 or something like that. Action tags kind of relate to validation. And there's more reading that you can do about action tags by clicking on this Learn About Action Tags button right here. But basically what happens with action tags is it's a way of, or it allows you to do a lot of different things, including validating that certain choices, aren't entered because it was intentional. So let's talk about that for a second. Action tags can hide some choices of a multiple choice field in certain situations. It can allow checkbox fields to have a maximum number of checkboxes that can be checked. So if we're saying like, select your top 3, click your top 3, and you click 4, an action tag can be used to make sure that the participant or that the person entering data did not click more than 3. It allows for the designation of a checkbox choice to be a none of the above option, ensuring that no other choices are checked if that one is selected. So if I select none of the above, it would make sure that nothing else is also selected. And so you can see that action tags allow for additional functionality when we're talking about validating these variables. There's lots of versatility involved in action tags. One of these action tags, in action right here, if we have a question that's, what kind of dessert do you like? And it's ice cream, chocolate cake, or none of the above. This variable can include an action tag with it. Action tags start with the @ sign. And this particular action tag is none of the above. And we're going to specify that the none of the above option is 4. So if the number 4 is checked, REDCap knows that that is a none of the above option and that no other choices should be checked. And there's really a lot of stuff to go into with action tags, too much to go over in this workshop, but clicking this action tags button will take you to the page where you can learn all about action tags and how they can help with your, make your life easier with data collection. Okay, before we finish with this section, make sure that we've checked for identifiers to ensure that all identifier fields have been tagged. Check to make sure that all personal identifying information has been flagged as such. And then once you do that, you can complete the data collection instrument. And I believe we've reached the first section of our breakout rooms where we're going to create these forms and validate our variables. So we created some variables, we validated some variables. We're going to talk a little bit more about variable creation. One really easy way to create variables, if you're going to have a lot of variables that are similar in nature, is to add a matrix of fields. And this is good if you have a section with consecutive questions that are maybe yes/no questions, or if you have a Likert scale and have maybe like 9 questions in a row that are rated from 1 to 7, or if you have a list of, let's say we're looking at physical activity, on how many days in the past week did you bicycle, did you walk, did you jog, etc. Matrix of fields can make this really easy. We can see here that we're in the matrix of fields section. We can have header text optional. And these matrix column choices are going to be yes or no. So this is going to be a section where we're going to have a lot of questions that are either yes or no. The rows of the matrix are going to be each, each its own distinct field or question with its own variable name and its own label. So in this case, our first question is going to be, do you smoke? The variable name will enter right here, smoke. And then if we want any annotation, we can enter it there and we can check whether or not that variable is required. So whereas before we manually entered in all of our variables through create variable, here we're kind of doing a batch of that. The second question is going to be, do you drink alcohol? It's going to be yes or no, by requirement, because those are the only two choices. And then variable name for that is alcohol. We have other matrix information down here. How do you want the answers to be formatted? And in this case, it's going to be a single answer, so participants can only select yes or no as a radio button. And then the matrix group name is going to be yes or no, and that's going to be the name for the group of questions that we have. So you would add each field, add the answer choices, pick the format of the answers, and then name the group as the steps for adding this matrix of fields. And this is how it would look. We would automatically get this matrix group called yes or no, and then we'd have our variables in this group. So variable smoke, or variable alcohol, and then the two answer choices right there. One of the questions in the last breakout room asked you to copy the one of the variables. An easy way to do that when you have your variables in the editor is to click the copy button right here. These are shortcuts for a lot of common functions that you would want to do with your variables, like editing, deleting, moving, or branching logic. And you can kind of get a sense of what branching logic is based on this image right here. It's what happens when you either keep going in the survey, or maybe you want to divert a little and ask some more questions based on something that the participant had answered. So in that sense, branching logic is variables that are asked depending on the values of other variables. So for example, if we had a variable that was, what is the date of the last menses, we wouldn't want to ask that for males. We would only want to ask that for women, because it would just clutter up the survey if we had additional questions that weren't relevant for our participants. We can also include calculated variables like BMI from weight and height. Our recommendation is to use these calculated variables very sparingly in REDCap. That's because it's better to create calculated variables down the line than actually have them in your database. And I don't know why I don't have the image there. Obviously, it won't do any good to click on just a thing of yellow. But branching logic, you would click on that green, diverging arrow that we saw right here for branching logic. You have to specify both the branching variable and the variable that depends on the branching before the branching logic can be assigned. So if you wanted to ask the date of last menses, you'd have to actually create that variable before you could do branching logic for that based on the participant's gender. Second requirement is that the branching variable has to come first on the form. For example, you can't have what is the date of last menses before the participant's gender. But we're going to have a lighthearted example right here. If our question is, which of the following do you like? Ice cream, nachos, pizza, and cheesecake, and you can select any of these. We would only want to ask participants why they like nachos if they actually said they liked nachos. So to create the branching logic for this on why do you like nachos, we would click on that particular branching icon, and then we'd be able to specify to only ask the question, why do you like nachos, if the participant said they liked nachos. And you can see right here, branching logic, this variable up here is called likes. The second response option is nachos. That's why we see likes 2. And then if they click it, that variable is going to get a value of 1. So this red text right there is just the way of saying if the participant actually clicked that they like nachos, then this question will be asked.
And then Trevor, do you actually, then you have a 1 right next to likes 2. Does that mean they only can list one reason, or what's that 1 for?
Yeah, so the way that these checkboxes are actually translated into the data that you see is that each of these variables right here has a value of 0 if it's not checked and a value of 1 if it is checked. So this right here is saying the 1 would be saying that that particular option was checked. And if it's not checked, it would be 0. So for example, if we said likes 2 equals 0, then I might want to ask the question, well, why don't you like nachos? Everybody likes nachos. So likes 2 equals 0 would be the question, why don't you like nachos, since you didn't select it?
Thank you.
Okay, so there's a couple different ways that we can do branching logic here. The first way is by using the advanced branching logic syntax, and that is what we saw on this last page right here. So we can just put in likes 2 equals 1 if we know what we're looking for. But an easier way to do that would be the drag and drop logic builder, which will show us all the possible options that we could have as branching logic. So the first field right here is asking us display field traces for the following data collection instrument. So this is our nacho survey that we're doing. And then we want to see what values are we basing this off of. We would click right here, likes equals nachos 2. This is going to say that the participant selected that they like nachos. Drag it over to the right side. So this branching logic is going to be based on if they said that they like nachos. And then we can show the field only if all the following are true or any of the following are true. So in this case, since we only have one particular condition for this branching logic, it sort of doesn't matter which one we pick. But if we had a list of, let's say like nachos, tacos, burritos, things like that, we might want to say if any of the below are true, and then say, why do you like this particular food item, or something like that. When you specify branching logic, it'll be noted on the screen. So for example, right here, we see that this particular variable, why do you like nachos, is a part of some branching logic question that's indicated in the red text right there. The actual application of branching logic doesn't show in development mode. You will always see the variable in development mode. It will only be hidden in production mode. So once we switch to production mode, this why do you like nachos variable is only going to show if nachos is checked. And then we said, don't, try not to use it, but if you have to use calculated fields, the way that you do that is to add a new field. And then in the field type before, where we saw things like text or all those different fields, we could click calculated field. We would give it, a label and a variable name like we usually do. But since it's a calculated field, now we have an additional area right here where we say, well, what is the equation that we're going to be working with? And the equation for BMI in this case is going to be weight divided by height squared times 703, which is the equation for BMI given weight and height. Weight is in a bracket because that would be the weight variable that was already specified in the form, and height is in a bracket because that is the name of the height variable that is already specified in the form. So our variable names, when we refer to them down the line, are going to be in brackets. Bracket would indicate the name of the variable that is in your data set. And now that we know a little bit about branching logic and calculated fields, we're going to go back into our breakout rooms and do the second activity. It has a little bit of versatility, and it can be used to make the form more personal if you're going to be doing surveys. If you want to know a little bit more about how to do piping when you're creating a new field, you can click on this purple piping button right down here, but we'll go over just a quick introduction to it. The first thing that you have to do is figure out what variable you're going to be using that is going to include piping. So the question here is, what is the date that the participant began using fish oil supplement? The variable name is right here. And what we're going to do here is pipe date started fish oil into a new field called are you still taking fish oil? So right here, the field type is going to be yes, no for still taking fish oil. And we're going to be using the date that they started fish oil in the field label for are you still taking fish oil? How does this look? The field label is you reported you started taking fish oil supplements on, and then the part that's piped is the value of the date that they said that they started fish oil. Are you still taking the fish oil supplements? And so before, you need to enter the date that they started fish oil variable to be piped into the field later on. So our first variable that we would be using here is the date that they began the fish oil supplement, which is a date variable right there. And then if we set our variable up in this way with the piping in, the field label here, then the way the variable looks down below is you reported you started taking fish oil supplements on 12/7/2020. So even though it looks to us like the name of the variable in brackets, the way it's going to show up when somebody's filling out the survey is it's going to pipe the actual value of that variable into the label. So the value that they put for the date they began taking the fish oil supplement will appear in this field text. And so you can use this in a situation like this, or you can maybe even at the end of the survey, if you have their name, have a little statement at the end saying, thanks, John, for taking our survey, or something like that. And so in a nutshell, that is piping. I think I'm going to hand it over to Anita right now for events and arms.
Okay, so now that we have created forms and fields, the next thing we're going to talk about is defining our events within REDCap. And so essentially that will let us specify which data is collected at what time points. So our study events are basically time points in which our data is collected, and it can be either determined by our study design. So some examples would be pre-screen, at baseline, and maybe a post-intervention follow-up, or something like time of injection and then time intervals following the injection. Or they can also be irregular events, such as adverse events. And there are a couple of things that we want to consider. One of them is our data being collected all at once? Is it a cross-sectional or a survey, or is it collected multiple times? Is our data being collected at regular intervals? Again, is it study defined, or is it collected at irregular intervals, such as adverse events or irregular doctor visits? And lastly, does every participant have the same data collection schedule? So maybe we have a study design that requires regular blood draws for a treatment group, but that isn't collected in our control group. And so this is handy because if maybe we have demographic data that we want to collect at baseline and maybe a first survey and blood work, but in our follow-up surveys, maybe we want to do those at 6-month intervals and maybe a final blood draw at 2 years. Then in that case, we could define events as baseline, 6, 12, 18, and 24 months. So this is kind of what our data collection matrix looks like. So we'll see that in blue, we have what is being collected. So that's our baseline patient characteristics. We have physical exams, hormone levels, a quality of life questionnaire. And then in green up at the top, these are our events or when they're being collected. So in this case, we created 3 events. We have baseline, we have post-test, and we have follow-up. And then in this case, the red is who. So everyone is getting the same measurements. So our who would be all participants in this data collection matrix. So there are 3 steps to defining and designating our instruments to events that are part of the planned study design. So first, within REDCap, we want to enable longitudinal data collection. This is all done in the project setup page. And then we want to define our events. And then we want to designate the instruments for our events. So again, this is in the project setup page. So there's a button right here that we'll see. We can just click enable, and this will turn green, and it'll let us enable our longitudinal data collection. And then next, we would want to define our events. And then once we do that, we create these 3 events, let's say baseline, post-test, and follow-up. If we wanted to create more events, you could just click on this add new event, type in the name of your event, and then that would create an additional event. And then you would designate instruments for events. So just going back quickly to the previous slide, there's also a button here that lets you designate instruments for events at the very top. So this is what it kind of looks like. It takes you to this data collection matrix that we kind of looked at before. So this lets us specify which data collection instruments we want for which events. So in this case, we're collecting demographic, history and physical, cortisol, and the questionnaire all at baseline. And so we can go in and select whether we want the same instruments collected at post-test, or maybe just the quality of life questionnaire collected at post-test. So this is where we would be able to designate which instruments we want for what events. So then when you click on begin editing, that's when it'll take you to some checkboxes, and that's when you can do that editing. So I think this leads us to our 3rd activity. Okay, so next we're going to talk a little bit about study arms. So sometimes we may have different groups that we want to collect different data for at different times. So a study arm will let us do that. So we can group our events into arms, and within a project, we can have more than one arm, and we can have as many events as we need within each arm. So an example of when we might need study arms would be when we have comparison groups in a trial. So maybe a treatment group and a control group, and we're collecting different data for these two groups at different event times. So to set up the arms within REDCap, again, this is in the project setup page. We have to enable our longitudinal data collection. And then within define my events, you can go to add new arm. And so again, arm 1 could be a control group, arm 2 could be an intervention group. And we can have more arms per study. And so we have to also remember to assign our events to each of the arms, kind of similarly to how we were doing that earlier. We would go to designate instruments for my events. And then so now you have a separate arm here that you have to designate your events or your instruments for each of your events. So again, if you click on begin editing, you can select which data collection instruments you want for arm 2, and then you would do the same for arm 1. So next we're going to talk about repeated events. So this is when we have instruments that can be collected at multiple unplanned times. So maybe a medication that started. So instruments and events can be repeated an unlimited number of times without having to specify the amount needed. And there are 2 steps to this. So the first step is assigning your forms to the event times. And then you also have to enable repeatable instruments and events within REDCap. And there's a video in REDCap, and I'll show you where you can get to that. It's quite a lengthy video, but there's a lot to think about. So we recommend that you watch it. Okay, so here, again, this is assigning your forms to events. So let's say we wanted our adverse event report to be a repeated instrument. So we would go through and let's say we're assigning it to the post-test and to follow-up events. And again, this is under the project setup page, so we can enable repeatable instruments and events. And again, you'll see that it turns green and you'll see a green check mark. And that lets you know that you've enabled it. And then it will take you to this page when you select modify on the previous page. If you click onto modify, it will open up this box right here. And so remember, we assigned the adverse event report to post-test and follow-up events. And then so if you click on within this repeat entire event or select the instruments column, if we just want to repeat the instrument, it will let us select which instrument we want to repeat. And so we want to have the adverse event report as a repeatable instrument. So we can check that. And so now this will let us essentially input a new or enter a new adverse event at an unplanned time. So we can enter more than just once. And this is where within REDCap, this is where you can go and find the video. REDCap has these little question mark boxes, which are really helpful. If you're ever unsure about what something is, you can click on it and it pulls up a little help box for you. So same thing for the repeatable instruments and events. If you click on this box right here, it'll pull up this and it'll take you to this video that you can watch. And this can go into a lot more detail about repeatable instruments and events if you have any further questions or want to go more complex with how you're designing it. And I think this leads us to activity 4.
Okay, define your users and permission. Whoops. So in a research study projects, there's always a group of people working on a study. Not everyone in the group is working on data collection or data entry. Therefore, you will want to consider grant different levels of access based on their role in the studies. You could customize to each user rights accordingly in REDCap using the user rights feature. And you also can limit a user access to records in a database, use a data access group, DAX. This feature often used in a multi-site study. Let's say you're conducting a multi-site study, USC and CHLA. You could limit a user access to records according to center. For example, you could limit CHLA user can only get access to CHLA data, but not the entire database. And then I'm going to walk you through how we're going to do that. So you could access these user rights feature under a project setup. You could go to user rights under user rights and permission, or on the left side under application user rights. Either way, it will take you to the user, enable to you to add user and then define the user rights. So when you add user and then giving user rights, these are the questions that you should consider asking yourself when you assign user rights to a user, that who will be access to this database. You don't want to have anybody just access your database. You want to limit like who gets to access this database, and then to what extent will the user be accessing it? Should they be able to change make changes to data collection tools? Are they going to be entering data, or they're only allowed to just view but not making any changes? Should the user be able to see and identifying information? And then another one will be, are they be able to export data and write reports? Are there multiple users have a similar access requirement to this database? So these are the questions that you should ask all the time when you add a new user. So once you click the user rights, you will see these box right here. You could add a new user, and then you also can create a new role to a user. To add a new user, you have to make sure that they already have REDCap account and already signed on for the first time. That way, when you want to add a new user, you can start typing their name right in this box. If they have account and their name appear, it means that their REDCap account is activated. If you can't locate it, means that they don't have a REDCap account. So, and then you can, once you add your user, you can add with custom rights. Or you could create a role and assign the user to that role. So once you click the custom rights, and then here's are the basics rights. So Melissa talked about like expiration date. So if a user no longer work on this project, you could give an expiration date. So that user cannot access to the database after that expiration date. And then you also can give the user what are the privilege they have. Do they get to design or make any changes to any forms? Do they have access to add new users or assign a data access group? If you check one of these, they have the rights to do all those things. And then for data export, if you click on de-identify, meaning like the user will not be able to export any identifier information, notes, or text boxes. So all those like text, free text, that user won't be able to export it. Oops. So, and then right on the right side, it's a data entry right. So you could give the rights to a user, whether they are able to add records or make changes or just read only. So make sure that the first form, you don't want to check no access. If you check on no access, so that user won't be able to create a new record. So make sure that they have, if you want the user to be able to add records or edit records, make sure they have access to the first form. And then another tip that you should remember, that never give a user have the access to delete records. Once you delete the records, you cannot retrieve back. Even though you reach out to REDCap administrator, they won't be able to retrieve. Once you delete the record, it's gone forever. So keep in mind, never give any user to allow them to be able to delete any records. Then once you have these, give them their rights and then just add user. So setting up a data access group. So here, how you're gonna set a group for a multi-site study. So you could enter and give a name to a group. So in this case, we have 2 centers that participate in a study. So we could enter the name and then just, before you, in order to go to this page, click on DAX, and then you could create your group. And then you will see this box. In this example, we have CHLA and USC. And step 2, add a user to the specific group by assigning their user right. So go back to DAX, and then now you get to assign each user to a specific group. So in order to assign the user to the group, you can select the user to whichever group that you want to assign and click on assign. So in this example, Anjali and Lee are assigned to CHLA group, meaning both of them are only get to access data for the CHLA data. And then Karen only can access to USC data. And Melissa Mert, she doesn't get to assign to any group, so she gets to access to all the records in the database. And then when you go to user right, you will see this data access group corresponds to each user. So these people have a different privilege access to the database. And then now we go to activity. Entering data. So once you already set up a database and then you have created forms and survey, of course, you want to be able to use this database by entering data. So for direct entry, data entry. So data entry sources generally comes from case report forms, lab reports that you would like to enter and save it in a database for your projects. So we're gonna go through the steps on how to add and edit your data in REDCap. So there's a couple of ways to add and edit records. One way is to go to the add and edit records under the data collection on your left side of the menu. And then you will see on your right, add and edit records. You could either select an existing record you already created or add a new record. So make sure if you have multiple arms, make sure you select the correct arm for the record that you want to enter and edit the records. Once you make your selection, and then if you select an existing one, and then it will bring you to the existing data grid for that particular record. If you want to create a new record, you just click on the new records for the selected arm above right here. Then hit these are the data grid what we just talked about. So you see all these boxes and then all these instruments. So then to enter or edit the data, you could select and click on any of these circles based on the instruments and the visit that you want to work on. So when you make your selection, just click on the one of these circles and then it will bring you to the form that you have just selected. Another way to add and edit record is to go to a record status dashboard, which is right above add and edit records on the left hand side. So you could click on that and then it will bring you to this data grid where it shows all the existing records that you created so far. So same thing, you could select any of these circles that you want to work on. Like let's say you want to, for example, in this case, I want to work on record number 2, 1 on the volunteer tracking. I just click on this yellow button. It will bring me to that instrument. You also could add a new records from this dashboard. I noticing it did not show up in this screen. So you should see there's a green box right here that you could add a new records for the particular arms. And then right here, create custom dashboard. Let's say you don't like this dashboard and then this dashboard is actually by default in REDCap. You just want to display only the enrolled patient. You could customize how you want your dashboard to look like by just click on this create custom dashboard. Okay, for best practice in data entry, complete as much as form as possible. Once you fill out all the fields and in instruments, and you should see at the bottom of each instrument that the section header says form status complete, and you select, these are the options that you could select. You could select either incomplete, unverified, or complete for that record. Once you select one, you could save and exit form, and then it save the data you have just entered, go to the records homepage. So when you're working on a long data collection form where you have a lot of fields to fill out, and then it's wise, you would want to save your work as you go. So if you click on the save and save button, and it allows you to save the data that you have worked on so far and continue entering data for that subject on that form. And if you choose save and exit record, is to save the data and go to the add edit records page. And then if you click on save and to go to the next record, it'll save the data that you have entered and then go to the record homepage and you can work on the next record. So all these instruments that created in REDCap are essentially CRF. So you could download these PDF form for paper collection or IRB application. If you click on this view PDF, it actually downloads that instruments corresponds to whichever instruments that you clicked on. So you will have a blank form. And another alternative to download the PDF file of the form, you could go to the record status dashboard, click on any form that you wish to download. And then when you're in a form, you see these drop-down menus on top of it. And then you could choose whether you want to download the PDF form with no data or with saved data. You also could download all the forms and surveys in the database, either with no data or with saved data. Once you have already entered your data and then you want to export your data, be able to analyze your data. So to export your data, you could, under application on the left-hand side, so you could click on data export report and stats. And then it will bring you to this page. So the first one, all data. So for this option, you basically download all the data in your database. And then if you wish to only export a selected instruments or an event, you could select the instruments, whichever you want, and the event. And once you make your selection, and then you just click export. Or you could create a custom report where you have a very specific report that you want to look at. You could choose like a specific variable from a selected instruments and events. You could create it and save it, and then it will show up right here. And then you can click export. Once you hit the export data button, and it brings you to this page, you could select the format of how you want your data to be exported, either in Excel, SPSS, any statistical software package. For Excel, there's two types of format. So one, the raw data, meaning like they just export all the raw data. And then with labels, especially for labels, especially those field is a categorical, they only export the label, but not the data. So you just have to make your choice. So once you make your choice, and then just click on export data and then download your data. So we talk about data entry when we enter your data one by one. So REDCap also allows you to import data using the data import tools. This is actually useful when you have your data already collected and it needs to integrate into the database. So how do you do that? You go to data export tool on your left under application. And you could download the data import templates. So they have all these instructions, but be sure to follow this instruction carefully. Here's the data template that I downloaded. So here how it looks like. So they have all these variable names for all the variables in this database. I use these, the activity, the breakout activity database. So these field names are from this database. So for some reason, I have this data collected for activity frequency, but I did not get to access to REDCap at that time. So I put it in an Excel file. So I have collected these data for these participants. So now I want to integrate into the database. So I make sure these all these data go to according to the field for the activity frequency. And then I make sure each field, the value corresponds to the code book for the activity frequency. You can download your code book from REDCap. I think it's under project setup. There's a code book you could download from there, and then you can check to make sure like all your data corresponds to the code. Then I choose the file and make sure when you want to upload your file, your data, make sure you save it as CSV file. It only takes CSV file. So make sure to save it as a zip
CSV file, not Excel. So once you choose your file that you wish to upload and you just click on upload, then you will see this data display table. So here's are the reference of the data I upload. And then here's the one that how it looks like it's gonna go on into the database. So here are the key for the data display table. So I make sure I do not have any red box. Red box means error. Orange box means warning that something wrong about your data. So I make sure I don't have those color. So if everything looks right, you should see this green box says your documents was uploaded successfully and is ready for review. Once you have that and you're confident this is your data, everything looks right, and then just click on import data. And then all these data will save it into the database.
On surveys, and just to let you know about a few other features of REDCap that we're not discussing that are more advanced features, and that will be the end of the workshop, and you're welcome to leave. And after that, I'm going to do 20 minutes or so just showing you some surveys, just running through some actual examples of running surveys and setting them up in REDCap. So surveys, moving you over out of my way. There you go. So you have to enable use of surveys in the project setup screen itself. So there is yet another spot to enable surveys. And you create your surveys just like any other data collection instrument. So there's nothing new. You've learned how to set up any data forms that you would set up a survey, just doing the same things that we've done today for any type of data collection instrument. The difference of surveys versus the data entry that you just practiced is that the data are actually provided by persons outside of the study, meaning usually the study participants. So they're not users in the database, but you allow them a link into the database so they can complete surveys, and that becomes part of the database. There are two ways to distribute the survey, major ways. One, you can post to a website or send out an email with a link that anyone can access that website or email and get the link and enter the survey. So when you completed the REDCap workshop, got the email for that and got on the link, that was using the public link. That is anonymous. So unless you have something in your survey itself that says, get some information from them, this link and public use survey is completely anonymous. It also is, you can click it as many times as you want. So you could have registered for the REDCap workshop over and over and over again. That would have annoyed NISA, but there was nothing stopping you from doing that. The second approach is emailing selected individuals, where then you can monitor their response. And these are usually individuals now that are actually part of your study, where you're going to email them once or periodically surveys where they're going to complete some information. You can monitor their response, and you can give multiple surveys at one time, and I'll show you an example of that. So once the person goes through the survey, at the bottom, there's a submit button. Once they submit, boom, that data goes into REDCap as part of a REDCap record. And it shows up as a green complete button, usually with a checkbox in it indicating that it was a survey rather than something entered directly within REDCap. So here on the project status screen, you see that you would enable the use surveys under the main project settings. And in your online designer form, where you've created your instruments, you see a column that is asking you, do you want this to be a survey or not? So in this example, demographics and withdrawal are not surveys. Those would be data that would be entered by your personnel or you. And the weekly check-in survey is something that would be entered, sent out with a link to the participants. Excuse me. And they would enter that data. So as I said, you create the form just as you did, and you enable the survey. And survey settings, then you'll see is another added feature, which I'll go through in more detail if you stick around, defines the actual survey features, what the invitation will look like, what the whether you ask them just once or you send out reminders, whether they can save it to a PDF, and all different types of features. So it's something you should look at. Piping is useful in surveys, just as we've done in the database itself. So you saw about this before. So here, again, we're going to create a variable that's piping. So you can see for surveys, personalize them is very nice. So we might have somewhere in our database a first name variable. And this is part of survey settings. In the survey acknowledgement text, we said first name, again, square brackets to refer to that variable value. Thank you for taking the survey. So if that person's first name was John, at the end of taking the survey, it would say, John, thank you for taking the survey. Have a nice day. Here, as I said, is the options for distributing the survey. Here is the public survey link. That's the one that's anonymous. People can do repeatedly. You can grab that link, copy it to a clipboard and do it, or get embedded URLs to embed into web pages, etc. And there you get the link. So we're not going to do a survey. So other features then that we haven't talked about at all, calendars and scheduling. So you might have seen that there on the left-hand side of the screen, there are some options for calendars and scheduling. It enables you to track study progress. It uses, each project has its own built-in specific calendar where you can put, if you're using it, a person's events and times will show up on the calendars when they occurred. And you can use it just for, or you can place in just regular study events, et cetera, too, in their meetings and whatever that aren't really tied to the database. But you can actually put in people's event times and schedules into the database, into the calendar itself. As I said, you can link the events to the data via the entry form. So it's another way to do data entry. If they're on the calendar, you can click on the button and it will take you to a particular record. And as I said, ad hoc stand events alone, you have a DSMB meeting that you need and you put it on the study calendar, just like a general calendar. There is an online tutorial about this. I'm not going to talk about it anymore, about the calendar, scheduling module, and using the scheduling for a longitudinal project where you can, in terms of your defining your events, you can define an event window relative to some baseline event that helps you set up when an ideal visit and scheduling should occur for particular longitudinal events. And I don't know if anybody's ever looked at these tutorials, but they're sometimes a little deadly. I think they've tried to liven them up lately, but they do give the information. Another very convenient option or module in REDCap is a randomization module. So it does not set up the randomization for you. You have somebody do it on the back end and import that randomization into REDCap. But what is done is there's basically 3 steps. You define your randomization setup. Is it going to be one-to-one randomization? Are you going to have stratified randomization? What are your what are your variables that define your treatment group and what are the values for that? If you have any stratification variables, what are the variables in your database that define that and what are their values? And then you download a template as an Excel file. That would get sent to a statistician. Usually I get them. And so the template says, here's the treatment variable, here are the possible values, here's the stratification variables, here's the possible values. And I use that template then to set up the randomization, load it back into that Excel file. So we'll have treatment codes and stratification codes and who gets randomized when. And then you upload that back into REDCap as a CSV file. There is then, what happens is on the REDCap end, there's a randomization button. And you usually just give that access to very few people, right? You don't want too many people randomizing. I usually set it up in our study such that only a few people can randomize, and they have to confirm some key features. Informed consent was signed and the trial eligibility were met and the subject consented to be randomized, says, yes, I'll be randomized and I'll participate in this study. When they verify those features, then the randomization button shows up. And based on their stratification variables, if you're doing stratified randomization, boom, it gives you a random value, a treatment assignment. That person sees the treatment assignment, okay? So that's why you want to, in your user rights, if you have a randomization module, you'll see a spot in the view, no access, read only, view and edit. There's a spot whether they're going to be able to see randomization. So most people, you don't want to be able to see the randomization, but it's a very nice feature. It does take some setup. Also, if you're testing it out in development mode, once you move into production mode, you need to upload a new randomization. It doesn't carry over from development into production mode. So you need to make a new randomization schedule to go into production mode. If you make major changes to your database, I must say in production mode, where you need to switch to a new database, if you've made so many changes, this hard lesson I learned is you're going to have to start do a new randomization scheme for the new database too. So things don't transport over when you copy. MyCap is another feature that's relatively new feature that makes it allowable for you to capture data on mobile devices. So I just have, let's see, there's MyCap on my phone. So it's a nice feature if so you'll see the example. Actually, the example here is an example we're doing in a trial where we're asking postmenopausal women every day to report on number of hot flushes, breast pain, vaginal bleeding, etc. Just a really quick thing, but we're asking them to do it every day, where they used to have a piece of paper that we would send them that they would fill out and it'd come back with coffee stains and whatnot on it. This just, they get notified daily. They get a notification through their device. Please complete the thing, and it takes them 5 minutes and it gets done. So very nice feature for doing it. You have to, obviously people have to have accessible devices. There is also a REDCap mobile app. People get confused between the two. So the REDCap mobile app is you using your entire database on a mobile device. It allows you to collect data locally when you don't have access to Wi-Fi. And once you get connections again, the data will upload into your REDCap database. That's using your whole database, MyCap, and for your study, study staff to use. MyCap is for your participants to use, answering survey data, basically. So that's it. If you want to stick around for me to show you some features of surveys, I'm just going to do just kind of some live demonstration on a couple dummy databases I have. And I thank you all for joining. If you're going to leave us, you will get a post-workshop survey, which I'll show you from one of our first examples, how we did that. We like to know what we did well, what we can work on, and if there are other topics you'd like to see offered, please let us know. I know this is intended as a very basic overview course of REDCap to get you up and started. When you run into problems here and there is help through CTSI to help you through this. And you can always ask us, and if it's not something we can answer, we can refer you to somebody else. So thank you for your time. I will just go right into talking about the, give you some examples of survey features. And I'm going to be stop sharing and starting sharing. We'll see how this works because I want to show you the email feature and what happens when we receive the emails and actually doing the surveys. So bye-bye. If you're not sticking around, you won't hurt my feelings at all. Thank you for joining us, and I will just continue on now. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you is the fact that, see if I can find it now. Show all windows, because I have too many windows open at this point. Oh, there it is. I'm not sure if you got this email. If you didn't, maybe you can let Nisa know and she can forward it on to you. But our CTSI informatics group does do REDCap. They call them snapshot webinars, where they show you particular features of REDCap. And it just so happens that next Tuesday, they're doing one on survey distribution methods. So if you don't have that email, it actually came to my email just this past Tuesday. So you might want to search through your email and see if you have it. If you don't, just let Nisa know and she can forward it to you. Okay, that's one thing. I'm now going to share my REDCap screen. Can you see my screen? So I'm going to show you a couple databases. I'm just going to show you our simple REDCap workshop database to show the public link and the directed user-specific link. And I apologize for the barks and ding-dongs and stuff. So here's our REDCap workshop. If we and this is not in production mode. I'm just so I can show you things. So well, let me go back to the setup first. I have my cat on top of my notes. Let me get the cat off. So note that we have, first of all, enabled the use of surveys in the project settings. The second feature I want to point out to you is under the optional modules, we have enabled designate an email field for communications. So we'll see that we have an email variable in our database. When you registered for the workshop, you gave us your email address, and that variable field name is email, and that will be used unless otherwise specifies for all communications, including surveys. Okay. So now to the online designer. You see we have 4 forms in this database. The first is the workshop sign up, the survey you completed when you registered for the workshop. Prep and attendance that are just things, those are not survey enabled. See, so those are things that Nisa's asking you if you got your REDCap account and blah, blah, blah. So she's filling in information there, and attendance is just whether or not you attended. And then finally, we have a survey, the satisfaction survey, but that you'll be seeing at some point soon. So first of all, we want to show the public survey link, and I'm going to just be sending things to myself so I can go into email and show you what happens. So in the survey distribution tools, you click over here. You see there are the choices of the public survey link and the participant list. The public survey link is then it's just sending it out in a blast to people. Here, I'm going to get the link. I copied it. And I'm going to be using my email. So I'm going to stop share and start share. So I'm going to be using my email as Wendy Mack, the REDCap user, and Wendy Mack, the participant. Okay. So as Wendy Mack, the REDCap user, I might send out to a large email list, but I'm just sending it to this person, Wendy Mack, now the potential registrant. And I might have some information there, an email, obviously in there, and I would just send it. And in a bit, Wendy Mack, the potential user, will get an email and fill out the form. Okay, that form should look fairly familiar to you. Look, we're going to use this stuff for piping, right? And I'm just going to fill in some things here for the must enters, and we'll just submit it. Ask me some more information, but I'm not going to bother with that. Submit. It's now part of my database. It says I can close that, and I can close that window. And please let me know if you're not seeing things because I'm switching screens so much. I'm going to stop sharing that then and go into my database. If I can find it. I'm going to exit out of a few things because it's not showing me. That's pretty weird. I don't see my REDCap database at all in the share screen window. Let me see. I hope I didn't accidentally exit out. No, there it is. I see it now. One of the bothersome things about Zoom, I found if you try to share screen from your browser, you have to have the browser showing. So here it is. Okay, so if I go, I'm back in my REDCap. I make that mistake often, sorry about that. And I go in, and this is the record I actually just entered now. There's the workshop sign up. See, it has a green check, the check meaning it's a survey. Note the data collection instrument tells me which one are surveys and which aren't. If I open that up, there it is. What I had just entered. And so there I have it. So that brings me in. So I'm going to go back into that person's. I'm going to use the record status dashboard, and Wendy Mack, the participant, actually showed up. Oh, this is the prep. I don't want that one. This is the information that in the attendance. So let's go to the attendance. Wendy Mack actually showed up, so I'm going to say yes, she attended. And I'll say that's complete. I'm going to save and exit. Okay, so workshop over. Now we want to send out the satisfaction survey. That's going to be just to the people who attended the workshop, right? I don't want to send it out to the whole world. I don't want to send it out to everybody that registered. I just want to send it out to the people that participated in the workshop. So let's go back to our designer to look at that. So I want to show you a few things in the designer also alert you. Survey notifications up here. That will, this is Wendy Mac, the REDCap user of the database. This can say, I want to be notified every time somebody submits something. So here I said, no, I don't want to get notified every time somebody fills the REDCap registration, but I do want to get notified when somebody fills the satisfaction survey. Okay. This would actually, I'm the only user on this database right now. This would actually show all of the users, and you could click different people to get notified or not. Along with the surveys, there are the survey settings along with each of the surveys. So this was the REDCap registration survey setting where we set up the title. We might have some instructions in there that would start the survey. You can personalize it. You saw that look personalized with our CTSI logo. And there's lots of information on size and text and colors that you can play with. So you can play with this and test it all out. Question numbering. Do you want to participants to be able to download a PDF of their responses? For some reason, you might want to do that. You might want to save a PDF of the completed responses to a file upload field in your database itself, that you would make a field name that would tell you where that would go. We've disabled it here because it's a public. Here is another spot to put a basic field for the email invitation. If I have another field in the database besides this email that I want to use, but there's another spot where you can say where the surveys go to. What other ones don't you want to send here? If you want to limit the number of responses, if you want to limit the time it takes to take it, there is an option to save and return later, and you'll see in my second example, we're using that. If it's a long survey, you might want to give them the option to say, oh, they ran out of time or their dog went crazy or whatever, and they have to stop and start again. It will give them a return code to go back into the survey once they're ready to go back. Survey completion text. Note, option to auto continue to the next survey. We'll be using that later on in the other example, but this is just one single survey. We don't want to go on to another survey. And just some other things that I don't tend to use too much. Send confirmation email to the participant. You don't usually do that. Okay, so there are many things you can personalize in the survey. I'll get to the automated invitations. So that's the public survey that we sent. The satisfaction survey now, we also have survey settings. Title, now we're giving a hi first name that you had entered when you registered for the workshop. So you could try misspelling your name sometimes and see how it comes up. Thank you for participating in the workshop. Please take a moment to complete the survey below. Da, da, da. And there's the same text. If you have a lot of surveys and don't want to be doing this over and over, notice you can copy this design to other surveys. Nothing else to show here that we didn't see before. Now note here, we have an automated invitation. I didn't have it in the public link sent out because we just blasted that out. This is being directed now to particular people. Let's look and see what it is. So here it is. This is going from me, Wendy Mack, the REDCap database user. Oftentimes we will have, it behooves you to have a study email and a study that would be sending this out. Again, this is the email information that would go on the survey, and we'll look at that as it gets sent to me. What are the conditions that this survey is going to be sent out under? You could say once they've completed a particular survey, but that's not how I want to do it. I want to send out that survey when attendance, look, I'm referring to a particular variable. That's that variable I checked in the attendance form that said I showed up to the workshop. Attendance equals 1. Survey is going to be sent out. Step 3, when do you want to send it out after that conditions met? For now, just for illustrative purposes, I'm going to say send it immediately so we can see it. You could select a day or time, like for this workshop. If I had really done it, I would say send it out on May 14th at 2 p.m., something like that. You can have reminders, resend the invitation. I'm going to unclick that again, but you could send it every send at an exact date and time. So options to resend it if people haven't responded. And then you activate this automated invitation. And I'm going to undo that part and cancel. Okay, so by that, I should have received an email inviting me to do that satisfaction survey, right? Because I said as soon as it's attendance 1, send out that survey. Let's see if that worked. I hope it did. Let's see. There's something in my email inbox. Wendy Mack. This is to Wendy Mack, the participant. Can you see it? Yes, no?
Not right now.
Okay, I don't know if I shared it. I think I forgot to share it. Let's see. Let me go back here. Yes, I forgot to share. There it is. Okay, there's my link. Please give us some feedback on the REDCap. You may open the survey, There it is. Hi, Wendy. We piped that in. Thank you for participating, And I would fill that out. It's very valuable. Yes, it met my expectations and give me more. Okay, submit. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now and open up REDCap. Yes, REDCap again. For some reason, it keeps going to a different browser window that I have to go back over here. Okay. Back into REDCap, let's go to add and edit records to that record. And there's my response in there. Check, I did it. We open it up. There's the information I had. Okay. Note that you can also, in the survey distribution tools, there's this invitation log that tells me past invitations. That's actually a future one. Here are past invitations that have been sent out, when they were sent. I had done another one as a test, what got sent out and whether or not the survey was responded to. Future invitations is ones you've scheduled. I had scheduled, again, as a practice, my record one for one to come out yesterday. Today at 2 p.m. So I'll be getting another email at 2 p.m. today for that one I was testing out. Okay, so that just allows you to look at what invitations are going to be going out and which ones you've received and what the response status is. This participant list is another way to do it, where you can see there's all of the records, 1, 2, 3, they're all me, but you can use that. It shows I've responded, but I can actually also compose survey invitations, again, in the same way to a particular list of people. It's just another way to send out specifically to folks. So that gives you a quick overview of it. I want to show you kind of a fancier description example in a trial we're using where we were forced to go remote, like most of us. So we made a lot of our questionnaires that participants were filling out when they came into the clinic surveys. So that project the trial's called the APPT trial, and I said I don't want to take the chance of showing private information. So this is just a dummy copy with, again, just me as the participant in it. So I want to show you, first of all, again, the project setup. Again, we've enabled surveys. And again, we've indicated a field in our database that is an email field that says where the communication surveys, et cetera, are going to go to. This is called email_SCRC. Here, somewhere I wanted to go next. So this is a very long trial where people are participating for 3 years, right? In this, so we're just going to focus on this screening visit 1 field that we have right now, event. And you can see, again, it's telling us which are surveys, that there's this string of surveys here. Some of them have arrows going down. That's because I've strung the surveys together. So once they start this first one, the participant survey, it will just automatically go into the next one, the next one, and the next one till they finish off the vitamin history. Okay. This first one is a survey, and I have to recognize Naoko Kono, my staff member, who is far more expert at REDCap and surveys than I am, and who set this all up. And I thought this was quite clever of her. So subjects come in as SV1s at all different times. They're screening visit 1s. And so we're sending out these surveys at different times, and we wanted the clinic staff to do that. Well, we didn't want to have them go into the features we were doing there to do it. So Naoko very cleverly set up a survey that the staff completes that will then instigate the sending out of this survey queue. So let me show you that. We'll go into the designer to see that. And I want to, so the first, let me show you a record, first of all, of me. Again, Wendy Mack, the participant. I'm 100 this time, not 1. And the only thing that's been completed on me so far is this SCRC variable form. And that says who I am and my email address. This is that email _SCRC variable that's going to be used to send out surveys to. Note, we also have a study partner and a study partner email that we'll see later. That's our clinic staff. So again, going remotely, we try to very much more personalize the trial experience. So each participant is expressly linked up with a clinic staff member who is the person they communicate with, and that's worked out really well. So let me go back to the designer. So we have these fields now that are going to be used in the survey. And we have these survey links and the survey notification. So there's this one special one, this SV1 survey link that the clinic staff, that study partner, fills out. Note the survey settings here in this one is red. The others are all green. So let's open up that one. And it says the survey is offline. We're never really going to send it to anybody to fill out. The clinic staff goes into REDCap directly and fills out the information, and that will instigate the other surveys going out. Okay, so you see there's really nothing here. It's just offline. And the reason, but the key part is, let me show you that link. Well, let's fill it out for Wendy Mack, the participant. So the clinic staff member goes in here. We have some piping here. This is the participant's name piped from that prior form, the email address. Please complete the 3 steps below to send the survey link to the participant immediately. It will go out right away as soon as they fill this out. Confirm the consent has been completed. And we'll say that it was signed today. Change the form status below to complete. The survey is complete, and save and exit. That's all the staff has to do. Now, Wendy Mack, the participant, will soon be getting an email, but let's see why Wendy Mack, the participant, gets that email. So let's go back to the designer. And the first form I should be getting is participant information. Go to the survey settings. You know, there's the things you've seen before. We've set this up with our trial logo, etc. I want to show you one feature here. Optional. Auto continue to next survey. Okay, so when I heard a ding, my email just came. So when I finish the participant survey, it's going to go to the next one in line. Okay, that's where those arrows are showing up. And then on this first one, the automated invitation, what did it say? It's going to send it out when what? When the following survey is completed, the send SV1 survey link. That's what the clinic staff did. So when they hit complete, that condition was met. And just to double check, the consent signed variable is 1. They signed consent. Okay, so we said as soon as those 2 conditions is met, that survey invitation is getting sent out for participant information. And remember, on the survey setting of that, I said just flow through to the next survey in line. So each one of the survey settings from each of those 4 surveys is just saying, go on to the next one, go on to the next one, go on to the next one until we get to the last survey. So let's see what happened. I'm gonna stop share that, and we'll share my email. Oh, this is from Wendy Mack from the, remember I had the notification from the prior one saying, send me a notification when an email when a satisfaction survey got completed. So that's that. Uh-oh, I don't see anything from. Let's see, let's go back and try it again. I'm going to fill out that survey link again. I'm not sure why it didn't work. I'm very sorry it didn't work. I'm not sure why. Other than maybe APPT email is having some issues. Test it out, test it out, test it out to make sure it works. I did test it out yesterday and it did work. So let's see, I'm going to go back into the REDCap again. And I'm going to, oops, maybe I should check and see if that's it. Let me check real quick. No, that's not it. Okay, let me go back into, my only guess is our APPT email is having issues.
So
Sure.
is this the email that was supposed to be sent after the first survey? It was
It's after this one, but I completed that, so it should be done.
Yeah. So I
So
think
it should go out. That's why I'm confused.
I think you explained it well. It makes sense to me.
Okay, you don't have to see it then. It did go yesterday. I'm not sure why it's not going today, other than I figure I might have changed something in the project settings. So I should get an email, and I bet it's probably going to come right after we get off. But for some reason, it's not coming right now. What it would be a link that would take me to the participant survey. That would then take me as I move through. Note that we have in that at each survey, we say click submit below to say it's completed. It will take you automatically to the next survey. It worked beautifully. If you want to click save and return later, if you need to stop for a moment, you get a return code that they need to write down. That's the only kind of little clunky part of it, is they need to get that return code written down or pasted somewhere so they can get back to it. But anyway, it does work. It does say it sent it out to me. But for some reason, it's not sending it out by email. I'm not sure why.
Well, the method makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So, I don't
All
know
right.
if
Thank you.
APPT has some glitches,
Okay.
maybe.
Thank you. Thank you. And trust me, it does work because we do it over and over and over again. I think I changed something in the survey settings that's screwing it up. But anyway, that's surveys as an example of very simple use of it for the REDCap, and then a more fancier use of it for a trial. And as you can imagine, we're doing at every visit, this is set up so they can answer surveys prior on their remote visits, as well as prior to coming into their in-person visits. So far it's working out very nicely. And we've been quite happy with it.